So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like usual, we'll do a little bit of orientation for the building that we're in. So if you need to use the restroom, there is a ladies' room on the floor that we're on out in the elevator lobby. And then the men's room is downstairs. We are sharing the space with an active bar in the front. They cannot close or be quieter. So if none of us can hear, please move forward. And it's really important that we use the microphones for that reason. Also, none of us can go behind the rear bar here that is in our space. And if you get water, please pour it into a glass. Don't drink right out of the bottle. And I think that's all of the, yeah. And we're going to do our best to give you a summary presentation of everything that we talked about earlier today. If we make any kind of misstatements, feel free to just shoot your hand up and we'll correct the record while we're here. About 30 minutes to make the presentation and 7 for me to attempt to learn it. So I'm going to go ahead and review everything with you all. I think our main takeaway from today's conversations is that they're not done. And that we intend to circle back on these topics, probably through some other formats also, to try and maximize the use of our time between now and early December. So probably some survey material will be sent to all of you after this meeting, following up on some of the graphics and things of that nature. So I'll go ahead and get started. And then at the end, we'll be able to field some questions. Are we here for 2 or 1? 1 hour tonight. So it's going to be a summary presentation, and then we want to field any questions that you all might have, and then we'll put this online with and the materials that are in it to keep gaining feedback that way as well. And like I said, we'll circle back on all these topics. This isn't the last time we're going to discuss any of them. So today's agenda was 2 different workshops to talk about buildings and land uses, and this is the summary presentation for those meetings. As always, you can use this QR code or the web address beside it to get to the project webpage on Summer Voice. This is a screenshot from Summer Voice and the schedule, and we're at the November 4th first workshop day. And there are 3 more, and then like a final presentation on December 2nd that will wrap everything up. And just to orient all of us, for anybody that wasn't here at the opening presentation, when we say Central Somerville Avenue, we are talking about the land area between Somerville Avenue and the railroad tracks, between Market Basket and Conway Park. That is what we've labeled Central Somerville Avenue due to the lack of a better name, and us not wanting to create some kind of like Dumbo or Noma neighborhood name, because we're not about that. So this is just another version of that map. I want you all to name the neighborhoods, not me to name the neighborhood for you. And so we'll talk about buildings as our first topic. So we address this really through 2 subject areas. One is preservation, and then the second one is really height and massing of buildings, and then design features of structures. The main thing that we talked about was the American Tube Works area. I believe there's a graphic here. It's highlighted in yellow and one building in white there. And primarily what everybody discussed is that this is kind of outside the scope for what everybody's talking about, either inside an overlay district or being actually redeveloped from its current condition today. But we did, begin addressing very surface level, addressing the topic of like, if these buildings were ever increased in height, should they be preserved and like a new modern wing go on top of that? And really where everybody landed was, yeah, that is a good discussion to have, but it's outside the scope of this project. So we're not really talking about the American Tube Works buildings for anybody that was specifically interested in those. But there is a point of conversation about this building here, and its address is 24 Dane Street. So that one could be included, and we'll get into the details about that moving forward. But nobody's talking about redeveloping any of the buildings right next to the cemetery or the current Greentown Labs or self-storage building at the moment. We led an exercise with 2 breakout groups to speculate about the boundary area of an overlay district. And really both teams kind of landed on the same area. One outlined in green and another one outlined in blue. And they're kind of the same blocks that are currently owned by Raffi Properties today. We We pitched the question about the overlay maybe extending beyond that boundary and having other effects on other properties. And two things happened. One is that participants started identifying things that they were concerned about protecting in the context of any redevelopment happening. But also, nobody's looking to redevelop a lot of the buildings in and around the Summer Nova campus itself specifically. So where everybody landed was that the overlay district right now should definitely be mapped with the same boundary area as the campus today, even though the new base district is proposed to include the Greentown Labs building and the one beside it that front onto Somerville Ave. So if there was a redevelopment project to come from an overlay district, it wouldn't include either one of those specific buildings. Not include Greentown Labs or the two works buildings. Just for reference for everybody, there is a Greentown Labs building fronting Somerville Ave and then one in the back as well. So when they're talking about not including Greentown Labs, they mean the one up on fronting Somerville Ave. When it relates to the character and massing of buildings, we started asking, this might be something that urban planners care about more, or even architects than others, but we wanted to know what parts of these buildings can you see from different vantage points, and any of those parts of the buildings worthy of higher design elements. Because of their visibility, we did identify some of those together as a group. We also discussed the design of building facades and the character that we want them to try and achieve. There was a lot of reference to old New England mill buildings because they host a lot of these types of uses today, but a lot of the ways that they were built back in the day are actually the way that these tough tech buildings might be built today to withstand the same style of weight, provide the same similar lighting characteristics in their interiors. So a lot of old references to the mill buildings of New England. We also discussed where public art would be included within the neighborhood and on buildings and in civic spaces. We get back to that in a minute. The efficient use of space, shared space, lobbies, and then of course the massing of various buildings to answer the question, or attempt to answer the question, what is too tall? I don't think we're there fully yet, but we start addressing that question with these diagrams that you're going to look at in a moment. So these were, like I mentioned, these were the focal points that were identified. Are these accurate star placements for that conversation? One other one that, whether or not this goes the whole way through, could have a big impact on visibility the whole way along that corridor. When it relates to building facades, I want to highlight something that's not listed here, in that I think Amy pointed out that a sculpture engages an artist one time and then it's there forever, or most of the time it's there forever, unless we have a dynamic program of public art that can change over time. And that might mean that it's more audiovisual in nature, or something that can be changed out. I think after that conversation, Russ brought up Trafalgar Square. Do I have the square right? And that square has columns around it, and each one has a statue on it, except there's one column without a statue, and the nearby museum programs that column's statue on a rotating basis every year. So things like that are examples of how we could create public art that then re-engages the artist community to display a new piece frequently over time. So that was a very interesting outcome of that conversation. We need more flexibility for blank walls. A lot of times behind the facade of a building is a land use that really can't deal with a window in that circumstance. And normally for our ground floors, we want to maximize the visibility into the ground floor. So if these ground floors need to be closed off for some reason, what we would normally do is require architectural detail, facade relief, some type of texture to that building wall so that it's just not plain and flat. But we have another opportunity here to incorporate public art into those walls when that's the situation that plays out with the land use behind that wall. Another opportunity is to have a window art program for those same situations. We can replicate that art and then put rotating art exhibits inside those windows. That we have some similar situations like that scattered across the city. Is that in Porter Square? Is that the CBS? Yeah. So a lot of great conversation about public art and how it might be integrated. And then, yeah, I believe this is where Amy's comment about that this needs to be thought of as an arts district, that everything that's a part of it can have the opportunity for being designed as a piece of public art that adds to the character of the neighborhood. One of the easy ones is probably street signage. Is there a different shape that a street sign takes on, or a color, or a character? Does it show, is it shaped in a manner that conveys recognition of the neighborhood? Just giving you one example of a physical feature out in the public realm that could be customized. One of the things that the city worries about is how do we replace a custom sign every time it gets injured? Injured sounds weird to say about a sign, but when it gets damaged, how do we replace that in an efficient manner from a DPW perspective? So there's some follow-up questions that we would always have about a fully customized public realm, but lots of opportunities that exist in the public realm to turn into public art. Yeah, so that I think summarizes the question about how much is that integrated into the physical realm. Another topic that we talked about was the use of space. Multiple people have pointed out inefficient lobbies and the need for spaces that allow people that are doing different jobs to interact with one another. And that's going to come from shared space situations. If you look at the ground floor pictures that Raffi has produced for their redevelopment concept, it includes a lot of dynamic activity happening on the ground floor and to specifically encourage a lot of that mixing. And something that I want to highlight is that when I heard all of you talk about success for either one of these sectors of the economy, it started with the word community. There wasn't success from a clean tech industry standpoint without community, and there wasn't success from an artist standpoint without community. And so they're looking to create a built environment. I think both of you are looking to create a built environment that encourages community interaction. And I heard you say a lot of the same things in trying to achieve that. So I think that's a big takeaway, is that how much community actually supports a lot of the things that all of you are trying to do here. There needs to be an ability for indoor and outdoor spaces to commingle and to flow from the outside to the inside. That exists for the ground floor, tough tech types of businesses and the active uses that might be on the ground floor, but also for the community center that we talked about. That's one of the points of feedback that the youth that use the dojo today have provided, is that we want outdoor space just as much as we want indoor space. So any kind of new community center should have that effect for it. But then also, although these uses are compatible with one another, both of them can produce noise and vibrations at different times that the other one is going to have to endure. And there are, for instance, sculptors and artists that can create vibrations, but there are also tough tech businesses that can create vibrations. And an artist could create vibrations that a scientific piece of machinery is going to struggle with, and a scientist grinding parts can create a problem for somebody running a recording studio. So although those are compatible uses, we're going to need to probably figure out noise and vibration adjacencies from both angles. We then drew at least 8 different vantage points. We might have added a couple by this point. Yeah, you got a 9 up there, of different building heights for the campus, and wanted to show you different pedestrian level vantage points to look at these buildings, so you can start to make judgment calls to try and answer the question of what is too tall. Are there upper story step backs? Are there street widths that we're trying to control through the building's massing? And we feel like this question didn't get answered, but we started down that pathway today. One of the challenges with, sorry Will, but one of the challenges with doing this from a live basis is that we're going to uncover small things that we might need to adjust for the, like sending this out to everybody. One of them is that the base zoning is 4 stories, and 2 more would be 6 on top of it, and we labeled everything with an 8. So that's just an accident. Is the 1.5 million square feet an accurate representation?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so the area.
Sorry about that.
No. This happens when we attempt to draw graphics in very short order and turn them around for the evening meeting. But then one other thing that I want to point out is these are mostly trying to show you building height and width and floor plate size, and I can point to those things, but they won't reflect the fact that Rafi's proposal, which is always illustrated as the last diagram, also proposes ground level open space, and it increases sidewalk widths. And so you'll see here, I'll be able to point it out, that their buildings actually decrease the floor plate size and go taller. And so they're actually increasing ground level space, but making up for that in height. And so when you see the renderings for the base zoning district, no one's required to do that, and the base zoning doesn't demand that you provide open space, whereas an overlay district would. So if we were illustrating any of the additional floors, like this one, in the future, we'll probably make it more match a version that produces some ground level open space, widens the street a little bit. But we didn't have the ability to do that right now. It would have taken way too much time to get you any kind of graphics that more accurately represented this ground level plan with these building heights. So I want you to pay mostly attention to building height and upper story step backs. Everyone with me still? Okay. So here we are at Market Basket facing west, and this is the base. When I say base zoning district, it's the R&D district that was just proposed for this same area. So 4 stories, 78 total feet is permitted, and the floor plate is allowed to be the full size of the lot. In a potential overlay, we illustrated 6 stories with 2 more floors, so just pretend that 8's a 6, with an upper story step back of 10 feet? 10 feet. So that's what this is showing here. So this would be the 4-story building with 2 additional floors and then a mechanical penthouse on top of it. Still with me? Yeah, okay. And then Rafi's proposal. And this is what I'm talking about, is this is only 0.1 million more square feet of space, but it has a height difference. And one of the reasons is because of what it does at the ground level. So I kind of want to call that out just so that no one misses it and we all are on the same page. Okay, so this is off to the west now, looking back east. This is Walgreens parking lot. And then you can see the 4-story base district. So this is still the same restaurant in the foreground there, just as all concrete. 4-story building with mechanical penthouse on top. And if we do the 6 stories, 2 additional floors with the mechanical penthouse on top of that. And then Rafi's proposal with this alleyway kind of straightened out behind it. This is now looking down Park Street. Did I jump ahead one slide? Did we lose the? This is a residential building in their proposal, and it has different floor-to-floor heights. So that's one of the reasons it looks a little bit squatter than the commercial building. I think we're missing a setup slide right here that looks down Park Street, but that's what we're looking at here. This is the 6-story version with an upper story step back, and then Rafi's last proposal. So we lost one slide here. Looking up Dane Street towards the train tracks in the back side of Somerville right now. So 4 stories with an upper story mechanicals, and this gap ends up happening because we're modeling multiple buildings on that particular site. But this could be connected in the long run, like this version is here. But remember, what you're looking at is height in this specific situation. So 4 stories with mechanical penthouse, 6 stories with mechanical penthouse, and then Rafi's last proposal. Propersey Way looking south, existing condition, 4-story R&D zoning district with mechanical penthouse, 6 stories with mechanical penthouse, and Rafi's last proposal. Oh, somebody pointed out that all the old mill buildings had lots of skywalks that interconnected them. That is an interesting physical characteristic that we could do to these buildings. Not modeled here, but could exist in the future.
Down Dane Street, 4-story base. Same buildings in the foreground there, just that's the limitations of our rendering at the moment. So 4 stories with mechanical penthouse, 6 stories with mechanical penthouse. And then Rafi's last proposal. And this is one of the ones we were talking about, because these buildings don't come out to this edge here, because there's an open space in their plan. So if we want to show this more accurate, we might draw an open space right there similarly. The ability to provide open space, though, has a lot to do with the total amount of building and how tall that they're going in every site. So it's not a zero-sum game that, like, if I add that space there and lower buildings, that's 2 places where square footage is lost. So just giving you their own perspective about each time we take away any kind of building square footage. And then Dane Street looking north. So this is the 4-story version, base zoning, and the 6-story version, both with mechanical penthouse. You notice that's hard to actually tell the difference between these ones. That's one of the situations where the upper story step back manages to hide a lot of from our own visual perspective. There may be shadows and stuff from this other angle, but. And then Rafi's proposal, this is again what I'm talking about, is they have a small building here and an open space in front of it. So if that were maintained, that'd need to be a question about for this specific site. Looking west in the Market Basket parking lot. So 4-story base district with mechanical penthouse, 6 stories, upper story step back with mechanical penthouse, and Rafi's last proposal. And then in Conway Park was one of the vantage points that was requested. So this is standing in the fields, looking at the houses. Towards Somerville, I believe that's the Bacon building you can see there in the background. 2 UAPs flying in the sky. And the 4-story base. 6 stories with an upper story step back. And Rafi's last proposal with the alleyway actually cutting the whole way through there. So that's something else we couldn't illustrate for today. But that alley could still exist there. But again, a push-pull of available floor space versus other urban characteristics. So the more we want to cut streets through, the more you put in ground level open space, the more impact it has on the available square footage of a lot and the potential building that you could put there. So there could be a skywalk across here. These buildings could interconnect. Those are all potential options while you're still trying to figure out all of that stuff. But from a very generic standpoint, that's the differences between all of these different sites from a 4-story, 6-story, and their old proposal standpoint. And we tried to provide some rough square footage numbers so you can start kind of understanding the difference. This one and this one are not off a whole lot from a square footage standpoint, but they're very different urbanistically because of the ground plane, the new alleys, taller buildings making up for that space at the ground level used for other purposes. These are larger floor plates, but stubbier, shorter buildings. Right, so that's why there's some characteristic differences to these. Is that a hand?
It is.
Can we get a microphone back to him, please?
I can yell if you want.
Nope, we gotta talk in the microphone.
I just wanted to understand what the rack is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you put the mic on,
Fair
yeah.
enough. I was just curious what the rack proposal was. You said very nice from what to what? Oh, no.
You guys have there's no mics? Hold on one moment for technical difficulties. Both mics are all sudden off.
Tell you what, Dan, why don't you just repeat the question?
Yeah, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just yell. I was just curious, when you say Rafi has very heights, from what to what?
What do you mean? You mean the building heights are different?
No. Your description of Rafi's proposal is varied stories or varied heights.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand what the variation is. How low.
They would have to tell you, we haven't analyzed their last project because nobody agreed to move forward with it. So we're showing this as a reference, but it wasn't supported. Although awareness is not something I'm trying to prevent you from finding out, we're not trying to argue in favor of this particular version of the redevelopment. Does that make sense?
Hey, Dan.
Go ahead, Anna.
Can you repeat the question for the people on Zoom?
Yeah, the question was, Rafi's proposal has various building heights across the different buildings. And they're going to be the best to speak to what their former plan proposed for each lot. But some of them are 8 stories tall, some of them are 6 stories tall. What was the tallest one on?
9.
9.
So what you see, and Dan, you can repeat for Zoom, what you see there on the right-hand side is a 6-story arch that's just running parallel to the tracks. So if you go back one slide to so what you're seeing there is a 6-story building just oriented along Park Street. So more or less the same height, just very different kind of presentation of the street. So and then as you go towards Market Basket, it goes up to 9 stories. So kind of ramping up, because something we heard from lots of kind of community discussion was focus height towards Market Basket, towards the tracks. So that's kind of how we organized the last plan.
So for
That's
everyone
what's
at home,
illustrated here is compared.
for everyone at home's sake, I think Madison's trying to follow along me switching the slides. The building in the back on the right-hand side of the slide is a 6-story research and development building. So those are high floor-to-floor heights. This slide also shows a 6-story research and development building. The reason they look significantly different from a massing standpoint is that alley that I was telling you about between these two buildings. That's not massed here. So these are continuing along Park Street without an interruption that same way. But pretty much the same, like these are not far off from one another.
Check 1, 2, check 1.
Dimensionally. So the last slide on each one of those is always shown as a reference from the last time we all looked at any other proposal. But our effort here is to try and illustrate for all of you the base 4-story district and anything above that. Because that's the question that we're trying to answer is what above that? So we'll get some of these slightly refined for the online version, change that number back to a 6, and make sure to get it posted. I'd love to get you all to mark up stuff like this and help us understand the specific type of feedback that you'd like to provide. For example, I brought up, I believe, looking down Dane Street, this civic space here changes our perception of this corridor, right? Because it's not there, so there's no building there creating another street wall on the left-hand side, like it would be if it was here. But this is an image that's depicting open space or not. If this is a view down your street that you don't like, we want to know that this upper floor is bad to me. I'm just giving you a potential example. You may not have problems with taller buildings. But if you only like 3-story buildings, we heard somebody bring up maybe the step back needs to happen at 3 stories, might be because they're spatially comfortable with this being the top floor, not this one. But if you all print this out or scan it or something after marking it up and help us understand that by literally writing on top of it the too tall or cross out parts of the building you don't like, or you want to see an increased upper story step back, sketch that right on the page, scan it, take a picture of it, you can send that to us. It's really helpful feedback. It seems kind of chicken scratchy, but we draw pictures like that ourselves on top of these to try and figure things out ourselves. Any questions about buildings?
Is there a reason that the mechanicals have to be on the roof? Is there a reason the mechanicals have to be on the roof? It seems like it adds a lot of height, and you lose potential space that you could have other things like park space, other uses for that.
So
that space?
some mechanical, the question was, do the mechanicals always need to be up on the roof? The answer is mixed.
Does it look like their renderings had mechanicals on the roof? Is that right?
Yeah, all the top gray floor right there is mechanical penthouse, and so is up here.
Okay. What's that
Our
green
intent-
just?
This is a good question, actually.
So our intent is to make mechanical spaces look like they're part of the building,
Okay.
ultimately.
Okay.
Yeah,
Does it work?
yeah, now it is.
Oh, it is? Okay. So the intent is to make the mechanicals feel like they're part of the building, right? Not to make them look like a separate thing. But from a mechanical basis, yes, most of the equipment needs to be on the roof. It's the most efficient way to do it. Otherwise, we end up using up parts of the space that should be used for other uses, but also they need air. That's the biggest thing. And they're also noisy. We'll wrap them in wall that doesn't allow the noise to reach the ground. But most of the fans are going towards the sky, which is super important.
Got it. Okay.
So if they ended up not on the roof, they'd still need to exhaust, so then they can end up on ground plane, but then if you have available ground plane, or they end up, if they don't have to exhaust, you could put them on a floor of the building, but then they eat up floor, usable floor space, rentable floor space. Sometimes if you look at probably remember some ground floor diagrams that were shown earlier, and there's just like blacked out area of the building, that's all infrastructure that makes the building operate. Go ahead.
Yeah, and from a sustainability perspective, we actually want to keep as much of it centralized as we can. Splitting it up throughout the building becomes an inefficient use of space. We're trying to capture as much of the exhaust heat as possible, which is part of being able to reuse that within the building. And if you put it on the roof, it's much easier. Otherwise, you're going to have roofers all the time.
But I think what Will is, Will has tons of experience in this, and I think what I visualized is that we have to do a better job with those. Like acknowledge that they're part of the building. Where I think if you look around the region, just these little fences that are not good enough. So I think from our perspective, as sort of long-term, thinking about this as a contributing place to the city, that those should be actual part of the building. And I think then that starts to suggest, well, what else do we do up there? Raptor habitat, green walls, art. It kind of opens up this thing if we're going to actually make these better pieces of architecture. So I think Will did a great job under a lot of time constraints today. So if everyone sort of imagines in Dan's markups, what do you want to see at the top is important, because I think we can do a much better job than we have on this.
And these are not building designs. I want to be very clear.
Mock-ups, yeah,
We're just massing, right?
yeah, rough massing. Did we get the mic working?
Testing.
No one was just working.
I'll try to repeat your question, yeah, go ahead.
So, I thought the images are great, but it doesn't, experience is everything. If you could give us a reference of a square with these building heights, that would be more helpful, because then you could go to a square and go,
feel,
and
yep.
I deal with that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the comment was kind of related to, looking at a computer rendering is one thing, and we appreciate it, but having a real-world example to go stand at would be really great. So finding examples with buildings at these dimensions and street widths, we can certainly do that. We'll see what we can find, and we'll help everybody figure out how to go tour those, even if we can. That's actually something that in my career, spanning back even before Somerville, we would absolutely do when we were writing code to create places that people had never had before, like in suburban sprawl. And so we would literally drive them to urban places and get them out of the car and stand them in front of the mixed-use urbanism and be like, what don't you like? What do you like? Tell me, because I will code for that instead of this suburban sprawl that you have. And so doing something like you're talking about is absolutely one of the ways we used to help people understand the potential built future. So thank you for this suggestion. That's a really good one. I saw a couple other building hands. The land use section is not that long, so we'll take a couple more and then I'll summarize that, and then we'll have lots of time for questions at the end.
If we could in the future, I'm interested to see if I either live on Tyler or live on Village, when I step out of my house, like these vistas are sort of, I don't know how high they are, but what am I going to experience if I step out of my house on Tyler and stand on my porch, or if I go to my backyard on Village? What am I going to see?
Yeah.
Sort of similar to your question about experience, but what I'm actually going to see.
Yeah, yeah, we can do that. Those people will definitely see buildings, but we can do that. Definitely help them understand. But they're going to be looking at a building in the future. Yeah, depending on how high it is. Yeah, but we'll create some graphics like that to help out also.
Does the code require screening the mechanicals?
Yes, the code does require screening it. So, an enclosed mechanical penthouse has standards and can be of a certain height, and then any mechanicals on the roof of anything that does not have a roof over itself has to be screened. So that's why you often see two-story penthouses or mechanicals, is because they have machinery inside the enclosed portion that can be exposed, but it still needs to exhaust. So then there's an enclosed level of machinery and then an exhaust layer above it that ends up having a fence around it. I think one really good exercise to do is probably wander around Boynton Yards and Union, and then also over to Assembly and compare all of the different penthouses on top of those buildings. Some of them just design a penthouse, like a crappy penthouse. Some of them design a really highly designed penthouse. Some of them integrate 100% into the building. And Somerville's kind of all over the map with which version it finds to be acceptable. And we've even struggled back and forth trying to regulate that in the zoning ordinance, and it's done a couple different ways in different zoning districts. That actually frustrates our inspectional services department, because not all mechanical penthouses are treated equally across the city. But these are questions we're looking for feedback on. Because Somerville has always talked about wanting to make sure that the mechanical penthouses are not a detrimental thing on the roof that nobody likes looking at, and to somehow architecturally integrate them into the building in a way that they kind of disappear and aren't noticed. And other areas of the city don't function that way. So which outcome are we as Somerville trying to get for here? Go ahead.
What happens when you box the mechanicals in? You take parts of the roof that don't have any equipment on it, and make it a perfect rectangle or square. And so I was wondering take another look at the mechanical code requirements, and that some of the pieces that are up on the roof, maybe they don't have to be screened. Just making a suggestion, so that the box, the 30-foot high box, that's a square or a rectangle, doesn't always have to be that.
Yeah, that's one perspective that I've heard about how to handle the mechanicals. I like personally, from my own opinion, I don't care what mechanicals look like. I don't care what satellite dishes look like. I don't care that the cell phone tower is up there. I want a working city. And so I accept all of that stuff up on the roof. And I don't think it looks ugly. I kind of expect that it's there. Other people have wildly different opinions about being able to see all of that kind of infrastructure on a building.
Well, the fence and screen doesn't just, it's not just a visual attempt to expect the visual. It's for sound and
it's definitely
and
also
for
for sound.
The dispersion of fumes of the exhaust. So that much probably needs to be still there. And I'm talking about possible other parts of the roof that doesn't have to be. Because it really makes a big change. Now,
Yeah.
you know, it's true that most people experience the height of the building only up to the second and third floor when you're walking through. But when you're living with it,
You get many more opportunities to look at it. And yeah.
and also experience the shadows and blocking light and air.
So like one of the there is one in Cambridge Crossing, North Point, depending on what you call that neighborhood. On the north side of the park is one building that you can see all of the smokestacks that doesn't have a screen around them. We need to ask ourselves the question, like, would we rather live with that because it allows sunlight and air through and doesn't create this other wall further up than requiring that screening wall? Although it is, I would say it's primarily aesthetic compared to directing fumes, because those exhaust things are directing the fumes themselves. Whether or not it has a major impact on the sound aspect could be very well true. But depending on how high the building is and where it's located, that might be less of a concern, where you would leave it unscreened. These are absolutely the points, the input we're looking for from everybody. We're just left to go off of other suggestions and other input if there is a contrasting opinion, but maybe our desire for this area of the city is to minimize the blockiness up top. So that's certainly a possibility. And we don't mind coding differently for other areas of the city, despite what I brought up about it frustrating making things different for ISD. But especially when it comes to a physical design standpoint. Some neighborhoods are different than one another, and we want them to be able to be different than one another. Yeah, Andrew's telling me to go faster. Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to move on to land uses. Like I said, we'll have more questions at the end. This one's a little bit shorter of a slide deck. Just as an overview, we talked a lot about research and development uses, the nature of office space, some of the uses that might not be permitted in the base zoning district that could be graduates of the incubators that exist on campus. Of course, the arts and creative enterprise land uses, the desire for a community center, and I think we pointed out that, or at least I emphasized this, that since day one, I've heard Somerville redevelopment go hand in hand with the creation of a community center. And so I think of that specifically as a pivotal piece of all of this. And then the potential for including housing, which we'll talk about in a moment. And we took photos of all of the notes that were taken all day today, so you see a lot of that taped up here, but all of that will end up being put onto Summer Voice, and we will write it all up. This is what's helping us remember all of these conversations that we had. So we're going to, after we do that work, we'll circle back with all of you and make sure that what we think we heard, you confirm that is what was heard. So in asking some questions about the future land use program for the area, I posed the question of, some of our other overlay districts have a ratio in how it regulates different land uses. And we posed the question of, does this district have a ratio involved with it as well? We didn't land on a specific ratio, but that's where the nature of that question comes from. Even if there isn't residential included in the area, there could be a ratio about other land use categories. So in Union Square, for example, it's 60% commercial and 40% residential, where commercial stands for everything non-residential. In this situation, if residential is not permitted, maybe we have a 60% R&D requirement. And then Somerville, as a landlord, would be making sure to always set aside 60% of the square footage for R&D uses. There might also be a percentage requirement for A space. There could also be specific requirements for square footage amounts for any of these land uses. We have the ability to get that specific in an overlay district. The question is, how specific do we get, and how much flexibility do we want to leave for ourselves? We asked the question of, do we want to require specific commercial uses or specific ACE uses? The conversation around ACE prioritized the creation of space for arts exhibition and then also art studios, but not necessarily limiting the scope of ACE uses to just those. But those were prioritized. We have that right. And then obviously there is a climate change solution orientation to all of the R&D that we're talking about. And in the base district, we proposed a land use category that would keep big pharma out of the campus and redirect them to other areas of the city. But that still means that some life science stuff is possible on campus. So for example, anybody studying algae to make a fuel or to eat plastic out of the ocean, that's still possible. But the biomedical pharmaceutical stuff would not be possible on campus. So we're very specific with how we crafted the different R&D types of uses for that base zoning district. When it comes to research and development space, One of the main focuses of the campus is that it incubates these uses as a starting point, and we want to lean into that and make sure that those businesses stay themselves, but also potentially expand on their own. Businesses are going to grow out of the Summer Nova campus, and the attempt is to capture some of them. Not all of them are going to need to or have the ability to stay on campus. Some aspects of their business are just going to wildly outgrow the available building area no matter what. Kind of like how Form has built a manufacturing plant in West Virginia. It's just, there's not enough space for a manufacturing plant of that scale, and all of the other businesses that we're looking to co-locate in this location and create a community of innovators and artists in one place, right? Like, we could maybe have a manufacturing plant, but that'd be all it is. The clustering of entrepreneurs is a priority. The clustering of artists is also a priority. And so I wanted to point out that those were the synergies that I was hearing the whole time. I think sometimes really what this is getting down to is a competition over a limited amount of space, but that these two sectors of the economy have more ability to support each other than I think is easily recognized because of the displacement ability of one over the other. Uses are needed to support our research and development activities. I think we're learning more and more about how all of the areas of our city need to have access to basic needs. Retail, health services, daycare, those are things that we'd like to permit in the area as well as along Somerville Ave or in neighboring districts, primarily so that this area can be self-sustaining. And that your ability to go to work and have your kids watched right nearby is something that's really important to a lot of people. The ability to go to work and have lunch options is really important to people. What we don't want to see is all of the energy from Somerville Ave get sucked inside the ground floor of Summer Nova. So we're looking to have a mutually beneficial relationship between the Main Street and the campus. But that it's been called to everybody's attention that there are supporting uses, both for arts and R&D, that can be also permitted in the district and provide support for both of those. Small businesses already existed on Somerville Ave. I kind of implied this. That is the main street of the area. There are a lot of restaurants, a lot of retail that the overlay should connect to, and any kind of redevelopment project we want to make sure does integrate well with all of the other land uses around the campus, and that includes the open spaces also like Conway Park. So that's come up repeatedly. You'll probably hear that more if you join us at the civic space and public realm session. When it comes to art space, I highlighted this earlier, that there's a desire to prioritize arts exhibition uses and art studio and artist incubator uses. That's one category, art studios and arts incubators, one long name. And that maybe 50% of whatever space is required is provided to those ACE uses, and that the remaining 50% could be provided to other ACE uses, but it would all be provided to ACE, whatever that number ends up being. We would enable the compatible uses that we were talking about to support ACE spaces. Something that was pointed out in some of our very first meetings was that a lot of the music venues in the region between events had a food service attached to them. Some of them even more than one. In the world that we're operating in right now, food and beverage uses are not permitted in the same district as the arts exhibition uses unless you're in a purple district, which is our mid-rise districts. To allow that to happen, we would need to, we've included them in the base R&D district as special permit, but we mentioned that the overlay district, because things can be more planned out in advance, could offer a blanket, these uses are now permitted by right, because the master plan would tell us where they were all going to be, and then we could plan them out in advance. When we can't plan them out in advance, we look at them more as a risk that we need to protect the district against. So that's where that special permit comes into play. ACE spaces are community spaces. There's so much to this angle that I'm not going to do it justice, but two takeaways that I always have is that without the creative nature Somerville would just be a business park. It's the thing that their own literature calls out and that everybody's identifying as one of the reasons this is a great place today, is the commingling of all of these innovative people. And that community is what is making all of this work. The second thing is how much the arts side of being integrated with the innovative science side is the character that made this place what it is, and we want to make sure that that moves forward. And then also, I already mentioned the arts incubator spaces. We all lament the fact that Artisans Asylum closed, and we'd like to see other opportunities where there are pieces of equipment and services provided to arts uses, just like they're provided to in Greentown Labs to scientific businesses or MIT Engine. We'd love to curate another arts incubation type of use on campus. When it came to the community center, we asked some specific questions about how big. The dojo today is about 3,500 square feet currently, with some flex space in other areas of the building. And they're not side by side, is that right? So today it's kind of dispersed in other areas. They do have an outdoor space immediately adjacent. But additional space is needed above what they're already occupying. They're looking for that indoor-outdoor flow like we talked about earlier. It needs to be interconnected with the other uses on the campus, but also provide flex space. So like that outdoor area could be something else when they're not using it. It could be one of the civic spaces that when they have an activity they occupy that space, but otherwise a restaurant is sitting in it. Access and priority to existing and new civic spaces. We highlighted the fact that Raffi had moved the original location of the youth center closer towards Conway Park. The representatives from PSUP that were here with us earlier are interested in making sure that the community center is accessible to some of the other things that might be nearby on campus. So that's where that comes from. And then there was a comment that we really need this. The focus has been on a youth center. But some of the desire is to make sure that this does function as an intergenerational place where others are also welcome, not just the youth. One of the highlights was that there hasn't been a youth community center for years in Somerville, and this is the only one that is available. So if you think about it from an opportunity standpoint, there are other places for us to go as older adults. There's way less opportunity for them to go hang out and do places, go places as teenagers and young adults. Allow for sub-uses. This was actually a really interesting idea, that there could be some self-policing inside of square footage that is otherwise ACE, that it would allow them to invite others, either on a temporary basis or permanent, to support their own needs in a way that we all would find beneficial and not a threat. So for instance, I brought up the yoga studio that was inside one of the artist studio buildings. Dina's giving me the wrap it up sign. So that's what I'm talking about. Maybe we don't need the zoning ordinance to police the acceptance of that yoga studio in that space if there's a setup where none of us feel threatened by that non-ACE use coming in to occupy that space. And maybe that's because the decision-making about that particular yoga studio could be up to the people running that building more than it is a zoning question. So we're going to look into see how we might be able to engineer a situation like that. But that might provide some of the flexibility in land uses that some of you are looking to provide for without the risk that Legal Seafoods is just going to be want to open up a restaurant in the old tasting counter space, right? But that could give you the door into providing a food service that provides lunch for all the artists that are in that building every day. So interesting idea that we'll look into more. And then phasing to prioritize the community center in the master plan. I pointed out that the community center included in the Boynton Yards master plan is in phase 3. And that the community center proposed here has gone from phase 1 to phase 2. We might want to pay attention to what phase it happens in if everyone's concerned about whether or not it shows up earlier or later in the redevelopment. idea of residential inclusion, this took up a lot of time earlier today, because it's a big question. Somerville's experiencing a housing crisis. The question always comes up every time we look at anything, can we produce housing in this location? There's a debate about whether or not this area and the 4 buildings that might be redeveloped here need to provide for housing. But where we all kind of landed as a group was that it should be commercial only unless it was significantly affordable or tailored to artist housing. I won't say that was like a conclusion that everybody came to, but I felt like the room was very strong behind that idea. But maybe we haven't closed the door completely to residential. I don't know. And then under discussion, I don't know if I just talked about any of this, but I told you to write that down. We house a significant portion of Boston and Cambridge workers, whereas, where's Wig? He said that the best, didn't you?
No, Bill
said that.
credited, but he said it very eloquently. But basically, the ratio of workers to people is about 0.7. And using that ratio, Boston and Cambridge are short housing for 750,000 people. There's no possibility of producing market rate housing in Somerville as opposed to taking whatever revenues you can and really focusing on equity and affordable housing, the deep needs. And one of the bases of Summer Vision is to try to get to live-work balance. Not to be greedy to take jobs and that balance away from other people, but at least if we get closer to live-work balance, the community and city have a lot more free revenue to look for, affordable housing, park space, trees, the kinds of things that the community.
So the jobs to housing ratio in Somerville is we have way more housing than we do jobs compared to Boston and Cambridge. So the people that live in Somerville go to work in Cambridge and they employ all of our residents, but they make commercial tax dollars.
Those commercial tax dollars are overwhelmingly free cash flow.
And most of our tax dollars are residential. So that explains why Summer Vision is so commercial heavy. And WIG is not lying to you. The more commercial tax base that we have, the more money we have to do everything that we're trying to do. Otherwise, all of the goals of Summer Vision, whether they are a program or new open space or whatever, can be funded out of the commercial
and our
tax
aspiration
base.
was just to get to that balance. Just to get to the balance.
And then one of the things to remember about housing in Somerville is that when we're looking at the Somerville campus, it's only 7 acres and 4 buildings, and we are pursuing other efforts to induce housing development in and around the campus, along main streets, in squares, and in our train station walk sheds. So there are other housing efforts, even if this project doesn't produce any housing. Not every project in Somerville produces housing. Some buildings are one-off buildings. They're just commercial in nature. But figuring out how to plan the pieces across the whole city and make sure we have a better balance is something that not every parcel needs to worry about on its own. And that's it. I hope that I made a good summary. I'm only 5 minutes over. Thank you. So we'll put all of this up online and get some of the graphics slightly tweaked because we'd really love your feedback on all of this. I feel like Sarah has some words.
No, I was just going to ask you to say that when you stick around.
Oh yeah,
we'll have questions.
we're of course here to answer some questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us, we'll take a couple for the broadcast. And then otherwise we'll mingle around in the room in case there's any small talk afterwards. I'll repeat questions because our mics have died on us.
That's still not working.
Yeah, so go ahead and I'll repeat your question.
It works.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Oh. I can't hear from my side.
Hi. One of the things that we talked about repeatedly was affordability and how zoning can help affordability. We've talked about the CBA a little bit and how that can present affordability, but one of the other key pieces pieces is policy. For the past year, the Anti-Displacement Task Force has been gathering a report which will come out in January. And I love this. I would like to see this happen for that report after it's released. If that could be something that happens that can be discussed with the city and be planned quickly, because the moment this is happening is when displacement will start even more.
So there's really two parts there. One that I completely glossed over is we put signs up along the window wall here and made sure to, as we were talking, discuss, I call them 4 buckets, but there are kind of 4 documents or places where different things that we talked about the whole day can go. One of them is the overlay district. One is the urban design framework used to judge any kind of proposal subject to the overlay district. One of them is Rafi's plan for redevelopment itself. And the last one is the community benefits. And when who is allowed to be an artist or occupy space or how much that space might cost, those are things I'm not allowed to regulate in zoning. And so they're better as an item that's negotiated through the community benefits. The second part of that comment was that the city is wrapping up an effort to create an anti-displacement report. A task force has been paying attention to housing displacement, creative displacement, and commercial displacement. I mean, commercial and creative are both commercial, but and their report has recommendations on how to address all 3 of those different types of displacement, regardless of if it's strengthening an existing program or creating something new or figuring out how to do a program that exists now slightly differently to address a changing need. And I do believe those are imminent. Luis was here earlier. If anybody hasn't interacted with him, he's spearheading that whole project. And I think that'll impact a lot of the work. The results of that project will impact a lot of the work that we're all doing moving forward. I saw a couple of other hands.
Anyone online?
Oh, any online?
Yes, yep, Tori, go ahead.
Sorry. Hi everybody. I'm Tori now. So I just have some questions around our Somerville numbers, because it's something I haven't seen a report recently, and I'm not sure how we're keeping track of it. Last time I checked, we were on or above our pace for residential. Don't know where the commercial was, and commercial being with work balance as well. And then far behind, we have our 150 or 100 acres of open space, like getting a quarter. Like, I don't even know how much we've achieved in the past several years. So I just want to recognize we are absolutely in a housing crisis. Every 2 weeks, the planning board, it seems, gives special permit to MR5s, and I just want to know how much housing is being built, because we're having this conversation, and we have people like neighbors that I care about, Aaron, who are and part of the Indies, they're a big organization and appreciate the work, and I want to understand, is it housing at all costs? How do we become a city that's lucrative, that needs to maybe worry a little bit less about our schools falling apart because we actually have a cash flow? So I just love to understand, not to make more work for you guys, but just understand the numbers better, and maybe try to understand how much the amount of commercial, like if we did a switch out of the housing to commercial, how much more we would make with commercial, if that makes sense to you. And I'd support housing, again, if we have like 100% affordable or even 50%. So thanks, I think you guys are doing a really great job. Thanks.
Thank you, Tori. I think the part that I can comment to there is that another department tracks summer vision implementation. We feed numbers into them, but we can see if we can get an update on where things are at. My last memory is also that we were above there's not a rate, a yearly rate goal, but we were high on our housing number and lower on our commercial number, but I haven't looked at that recently. So we could see if we can get an update posted online for you. So let's do the one last question. Your hand's been up. Yep. No, they're like half dead, so I'll repeat it.
Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll try to summarize down. So I wasn't here for all the conversations, so you said we all agreed that it should be commercial, not all affordable housing. I wasn't here. I don't agree with that statement for a number of reasons. One being kind of what the previous commenter just said about making sure the city has cash flow, all this sort of thing, right? Of course, building affordable housing is a great idea, but in terms of city cash flow, market rate housing supports the ability to build more affordable housing, right? That's a thing. So the other thing is, I think it's actually a social good for people of different income levels to live in the same place. And I think that people forget that a lot. We focus so much on we want to build nothing but affordable housing. That sounds good, but then you end up with all the rich people live over here, all the poor people live over here, which is terrible. And we have a horrible history of doing that in this country. We don't like that. The other thing is that it's really good for people to live close to where they work for obvious reasons. And all the things you said about community, people can bring their kids to daycare, all that's much easier if you live like right next to where you work, right? I had the benefit of working from home for a number of years, now I'm back in the office. So I'm very acutely experiencing now going back to having a commute and all this sort of thing, right? So if you want to create a space that feels like a community and people are all like working together and you know, patronizing businesses and stuff, having people living in that space really potentiates that. So I don't agree with that statement for economic and social reasons.
So the feedback was lack of support for not including residential for economic and social reasons. Did I say that right?
I'm disagreeing with the statement
Right.
that it should be all commercial unless it's all affordable. I disagree with both.
The housing should be included. And two advantages are being able to live close and also different incomes all living mixed up together is a beneficial thing than segregating each other into different buildings, which we absolutely agree with. One of the more frustrating things that we're encountering right now is a lot of feedback from developers that they can't make anything pencil out, and so they want to develop, like if they want to build 4 buildings, but each building has a 20% requirement, can I just take all of my and put all of the affordable housing here, and I'll go get state funds and we'll build that affordable housing. So we'll have the same market rate housing and the same affordable housing, but all the affordables over here in one building and all the market rates over here in another building. And that's not really what that outcome we're trying to look for. And what we're struggling with is the market telling us that they're not going to build anything if they can't do that for fiscal reasons. Or financial reasons. So that's been a recent frustration with the housing market that we're dealing with right now because of interest rates. But our desired outcome is for incomes to be mixed up because of the same reasons that you identified. I think one of the questions for us when it comes to these parcels and do these parcels need to be residential is what if the Walgreens property owner, and I'm not suggesting anything about Walgreens, nobody's called me from Walgreens, but Walgreens is right beside campus. And what if they came to us the next day and said, yeah, the property owner wants to sell and we would like to build a mixed-use building with 40 units above ground floor retail. That's the type of thing that we're talking about, like, that might mean that the campus could be more commercial because we're going to build residential around it and still absorb some of that demand that might come from the additional jobs there. But maybe not, right? We don't actually know what is all coming down the pipe all the time. So we're trying to make sound judgment about how mixed use or not every zoning district and every parcel might be. But I appreciate the feedback here. You know, we don't all agree, and that's one of the things that I want to highlight is that was kind of the direction the conversation was going, but it wasn't a unified opinion. So I don't want to imply that to anybody. Yeah. We'll let Wig say one last thing, and then we gotta go.
Two things. First, we haven't really talked about STEM as opposed to artists.
And I think there's an enormous opportunity for STEM startups. You know, iRobot started here, Bill Pack started here, the brains of Spotify were done in the busway in Davis Square. So I think, and for the youth here, I think we tend to say artists, sometimes we just mean small-scale entrepreneurial, but I think if we could focus a little bit on STEM startups, that would be a great addition to the mix of the small stuff that enriches the community. And then just, I agree with your sentiments on the housing, but the cherry sheets are really clear. You can look up the numbers for every land use in every community in the state. And there's no question that median income housing is not paying for itself. So how you deal with that, there's a lot of different ways to deal with that, and I don't argue with that. But the numbers are pretty simple and pretty clear, and they're there for every single fiscal year, for every municipality.
I just have a question. Maybe I'll ask you after. I have kind of an in-the-weeds question. I'll ask you about it.
Okay.
All right, so we are out of time. So like I said, we'll build around and hang out if anybody has any last minute questions. We're going to post everything on Summer Voice and ask you for your feedback, so please do expect some emails. We reconvene next Tuesday at Summer Nova, right? The schedule is posted on the website. So, and we have some lost items in the back. If you
Anybody? Taker?
power strip.
I know whose that is, and he's not here this evening.
great.
And I want to thank everybody that joined us from home. And with that, we will close because the lights just went out. So thank you, everybody.